Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I have a book video for you, my first video of book reviews for the year 2023. On my last book review video, I did mention that I didn't want to do a book challenge for this year, and I'm so glad that I decided that for myself because I'm not doing one for my Goodreads challenge. I just put that I'm reading 5 books in the entire year, and I've already exceeded that because I read 7 that I have for you today. And I'm so glad that I did that because I feel like now I'm really reading leisurely again and I'm not reading to fulfill a goal. It was great while it lasted in my book challenges, but I'm glad that I've stopped doing that because now I can read at my own pace, whatever I want at any time. Anyways, I still have 7 books for you today. And yeah, I'm excited to tell you about them. We're gonna separate it into 3 sections today. I have fiction and classics, I have nonfiction, and then we're gonna do poetry. That's the order that we're gonna go in. So yeah, let's just get started. I wrote down all of my reviews again, so if I'm looking at the phone, that's why I have a bunch written down. I just prefer doing it this way now because I feel like it helps me speak way more clearly. So yeah, it's either you get eye contact or you get words that make sense. We're gonna start off with fiction and classics, and the first book that we're gonna talk about today is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Taylor Jenkins Reid is pretty popular amongst people who like to read online. I was excited to see finally what her writing was like. This book is about a band, a fictional band of rock stars, and it talks about their entire story in terms of their career and a little bit after as well. And I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. I honestly have no complaints about this book at all. I love music and I love bands, and I have never read a book like this that talked about bands, so it was interesting for me to see what that looked like in writing. This book reminded me of the movie Almost Famous by Cameron Crowe, which is also a really good movie. So if you like Daisy Jones and the Six, I think that you would enjoy watching the movie Almost Famous if you haven't yet. It's about the same concept of rock bands, and it talks about groupies, the members, music, songwriting, everything. This book is written in an interview format. The narrator, I guess, is just interviewing every single member of the band throughout the entire book, and that's how the story is told. I wasn't very excited about that when I first started reading it because I didn't think that I would enjoy reading in that format, and I thought that it would get in the way of the flow of my reading, but it actually didn't at all. I think if anything, it helped tell the story even better because it jumped in between the different characters' point of view very effectively. So I think that it actually told the story in a very well and balanced way, in where we got the point of view of all the band members and their position in the story. I really loved this book. I have nothing else to say. It was really good, and there were no plot holes. Everything was very well developed and finished really well. Next book that we have is The Metamorphoses by Franz Kafka. Let's get into it. I have a lot to say on this one. I gave this book 1 star. But just hear me out, listen to me. I wanted to read The Metamorphoses as my first full work from Kafka because it's his most famous piece of work, I think, or at least it's the most mentioned one when it comes to him. I was very excited to read it because I've read excerpts online from his other bodies of work, and I really liked his way with words. I also just heard good things in general about The Metamorphoses and its effect and meaning. So I thought that reading this book would have a big and impactful meaning on me, but it didn't at all. The writing and pacing wasn't bad, neither was anything in that regard. It just didn't really impact me in any way. You could take a bit from the goal and meaning behind the story through the main character's interactions with his family, but to me they weren't strong enough to have a big impact. I don't think that every story needs a big impact, but I think that if you write a story about a man that turns into a huge beetle-like insect, that's a huge attention grabber, so you'd expect the book to be held to a certain expectation while being read because it already had this huge attention grabber. It sort of had to live up to it, and it just didn't, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. And what I mean by the impact is that I write poetry, for example, and what I'm always working on is visualizing my meaning more clearly so that I can portray the meaning of what I'm writing clearly and make it apparent through my words and metaphors without me having to explain later on what the meaning of my writing is. I think that it just lacked in that department. I think that you can get a sense of the meaning of the book, and it talks about alienation and solitude and stuff, but I feel like when you're reading it, it only scratches at the surface of those subjects. That does get better towards the very end of the book, but for most of the book, it just isn't there. And I want to give 2 examples of books that I think do that very well. Slaughterhouse-Five and The Death of a Salesman are books that portray the goal of the story and the meaning of the story very well through the story itself, to the point that it actually leaves an impact on you and you actually think about the meaning. And like feel it when you're reading the book. That's my thoughts on The Metamorphosis. I'm still gonna read other books from Kafka because I still really like his writing style in other things that I've seen. We're gonna move on to nonfiction now. The first nonfiction book that I have is Floriography, An Illustrated Guide to the Victorian Language of Flowers by Jessica Rue. I finally read this. This book talks about flowers and the meaning behind them according to the Victorian era. There's brief descriptions of the meaning of the flowers and flowers that you could pair with the flowers that they were talking about, so you could depict a specific meaning when giving somebody flowers. And it also has really beautiful illustrations. Let me see. So it's just a really pretty book overall. Peony? I don't know how to pronounce peony properly, but this is my favorite flower. Fun fact. I really enjoyed reading this book. It was exactly what I was looking for. I just wanted something brief that told me the meaning of the flowers. There are definitely other books out there that go more in depth in terms of the meaning of the flowers and the story and history behind them, but that's just not something that I was personally looking for, because I just wanted something quick that I could get an idea. I didn't want to dive too deep into the topic, so for me this was great. The end of the book, it also has bouquet ideas for specific occasions, so you can see which flowers you could put together to portray a specific meaning for a specific occasion, which is really cool as well. I use this book as inspiration for one of my shorts that I did recently called Valentine, that I uploaded on Valentine's Day. Each flower and their destination portrays a meaning, and I wrote about that on my Instagram as well as my blog, so I'll link those down below if you want to take a look at what I mean, and I'll also link the video down below if you haven't watched it. I love this book. Very simple, very quick to read, and something different, I would say. Next we have I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I got this one as a gift. It wasn't on my list, but I'm glad that I read it. It was a really good book. I don't think this book is a book to review because it is somebody's life story and it just doesn't make sense to review that. So really all I have to say is that I love the title. It's a great attention grabber. Even the picture in the cover. I think that she did exactly what she needed and wanted to do with this book and through this book. She's clearly been through a lot of hardship, and it must have been a process to write this book and to put that out there to the world. So it's very impressive. I give props to her for doing that. I learned a lot about her from this because I didn't really know much about Jeanette McCurdy. And yeah, overall, I think her writing is great too, and she adds a lot of humor within telling the story, which is definitely something that shows her personality through her writing, and it makes the book flow very well. Alright, we're gonna move on to the poetry books. I have 3 of those. We're gonna start with Bright Dead Things by Ada Limon. I got this book because I read one of her poems online and I loved it. So I bought a book, and it actually ended up being the book that has the poem that I read in here. Her poems are very casual and approachable and easy to understand. I really like her writing style. I feel like they would be a good book if you're first getting into poetry because it's easy to understand and it's casual. It feels like she's sort of having a conversation with you a lot of the time, or telling you a story personally. So yeah, I don't have anything else to say. It's just a really good book, and I really like the poems in here, and I like the way that she talks about nature as well. Next book is New Names for Lost Things by Noor Unahar. I don't know if that's how you pronounce her name. I'm sorry. I got this one as a gift, so I didn't pick it myself. And I'm starting to wonder. It's very sad. So yeah. And it's a poetry book on meditation, identity, loss, and loneliness. So it has poems, and it also has illustrations and collage photos together. I liked some of the poems in this book. I do think that it definitely gets repetitive. It's one of those that talks about a lot of similar themes, and I feel like sometimes those can be narrowed into a few poems. I definitely had to rack my brain to understand some of these poems. There's one of them that I read like at least 9 times until it clicked for me. It took me a while, but when it finally clicked in my brain, the meaning of the poem, I was like, oh, that's great. And I never know what to say in terms of that. I don't know if when I don't understand a poem, I mean, I don't think that you're supposed to understand a poem first try anyway, but I never know if that means that the author isn't clear enough or just that I'm stupid. But I also don't really care. Like, I don't think it's a big deal at all. I'm just reading a book, and I am not very judgmental of other people when they write books, because I'm just reading what they wrote, and it's not a big deal if I like it or not, to be honest. Last book that we have is 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair by Pablo Neruda. I know that this book says A Song of Despair on the cover, but I was surprised when it was sad at the end. I was like, what is happening when it started getting sad? There's some really good metaphors in here. Like one of them, I literally screamed when I read it, because I was like, how can you possibly think of this? How is that possible that you thought of this? One thing I also really liked about this book is the gradual descent into despair that it had. It had sadness from the beginning, because you can tell that when he writes these poems, he deals with a lot of sadness of his own. But then through the love and the relationship, you can tell that it just makes it worse. And I thought that was really cool, like the way that it gradually turned into the Song of Despair at the end, because it had happiness and hope towards the beginning, and then it just crashed. I also really liked in this book that they kept the original version of the poems written in Spanish and then the English translation on the side, because ever since I read Shika Sagawa, a Japanese poet, I read like the introduction to her poetry book. They were talking about translated poems, and she also used to be somebody that translated poems before she published her own, and she saw a beauty in that, which was super cool for me to read about, because I had never thought about the work that goes into translating, especially poetry. Translation doesn't have to mean that it ruins the poem or it doesn't like have its full meaning, because it can add like a lot of meaning to it as well, which is what they were saying in Shika Sagawa's introduction. So then when I was reading this and seeing the differences between the translations and the original, it was just nice. It was cool. I wish that they would always put the original and the translated, even though I guess the Japanese one, I can't read Japanese, so it wouldn't really have worked out. That's all I have to say. Those are all the 7 books that I read so far this year. I will be back when I read 7 or so more. Thank you for watching, and subscribe if you want to. I don't know if I said thank you for 800 subscribers, but thank you for 800 subscribers. It's a lot of people.